The glass missed my face by an inch and shattered against the cabinet behind me. Everyone froze. My son-in-law's hand still trembled, half closed around nothing, his eyes glazed with drunken pride. And all I could think about was how far we'd fallen as a family. The glass missed my face by an inch. It hit the oak cabinet behind me, the one I built with my own hands 20 years ago, and exploded into 100 glittering pieces. The sound was sharp and final, like something in me had just cracked too. For a few seconds, the room was frozen. No one breathed, no one moved. The only sound left was the faint clink of ice melting in his half-empty whiskey glass. My son-in-law, Ethan, stood at the end of the table. His face was flushed, his shirt collar unbuttoned, the veins on his neck swollen with drink. He had the kind of drunk confidence that always made people smaller around him. His eyes, red and glassy, locked onto mine like he was daring me to speak. "Pour me another one, old man," he said, voice slurred but sharp. "You're sitting there doing nothing. Be useful for once." Across the table, my daughter, Claire, lowered her eyes. She didn't say a word. The woman who once hugged me so tight at her wedding now couldn't even look at me. My grandson, Noah, froze in his chair, his fork halfway to his mouth. His lips trembled. "Dad, don't," he whispered. But Ethan laughed, that cruel, hollow laugh that seemed to fill every corner of the house. "Don't what, son? Teach your grandpa some respect? He needs to remember whose house he's in." I wanted to tell him this was my house. Every wall, every nail, every tile in that kitchen was bought with my sweat and built with my hands. After my wife died, Claire begged me to move in so I wouldn't be alone. I thought it would bring us closer again. I didn't realize she meant I'd be the one moving under someone else's rules. I picked up my napkin slowly, wiped a spot of whiskey from my sleeve, and said quietly, "I think you've had enough, Ethan. Sit down before you regret something." He grinned, a small, nasty thing that showed no warmth. "I'll regret nothing. You're lucky I even let you sit at this table." That sentence hung in the air like smoke. Claire's fork scraped her plate. Noah shifted uncomfortably. No one defended me. Not a word. I forced a smile, though my chest felt tight. "Right," I said softly. "Lucky me." Ethan turned away, muttering something under his breath. I stayed seated, staring at the broken glass on the floor, the way it caught the warm light from the chandelier. It looked almost beautiful in a strange way. I realized that was how life worked sometimes. Beauty in destruction, truth in the breaking. Dinner continued in silence. Forks clinked against porcelain, and the smell of roast turkey filled the air, but it tasted like ash to me. My hands shook slightly as I lifted my glass of water. I caught Claire watching me once, for half a second, before she looked away again. She used to be my little girl, always defending me from the world. Now she sat quietly while her husband mocked me in my own home. When everyone finished eating, I began collecting plates. It was a habit I never shook off, an old man's attempt to stay useful. Ethan leaned back in his chair, belching softly. "Hey, Walter," he said, dragging my name through his throat like it was dirt. "Next time, pour when I ask. I don't like repeating myself." I turned around slowly, dishes in hand. "Next time," I said, calm and even, "you won't have to." He grinned. "That's what I like to hear." In the kitchen, I set the plates in the sink and leaned against the counter. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something heavier, humiliation. My reflection in the window looked back at me, an old man with tired eyes, standing in a home that wasn't his anymore. The moonlight cut across my face like a scar. I thought about my wife, about how she would have stood beside me and told him off with that fierce, gentle voice of hers. But she wasn't here. She'd been gone for 7 years, and in her absence, I had become something she would never recognize, quiet, polite, invisible. Laughter echoed from the living room. Ethan's laughter, that sound, thick and ugly, filled the house that once held love. It made my stomach twist. I washed the dishes slowly, staring at the running water. Each broken plate, each scratch on the countertop, each mark on the wood told a story of use, of time, of giving. But not once did it tell a story of me. When the house went quiet, I stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp. I walked to my workshop, my sanctuary. The light switch flickered to life, revealing rows of tools, dust-covered and waiting. The smell of sawdust hit me, a scent that carried decades of memories. I sat at the old bench and traced my hand over the worn surface. How many toys had I made here for Noah? How many shells for Claire? How many gifts for Ethan? That ungrateful fool. When I was still trying to buy his approval. I had built things all my life. Things that lasted longer than gratitude. Tonight, though, I wasn't thinking about building. I was thinking about remaking. I reached into a drawer and pulled out my old leather notebook. Inside were designs, sketches, and notes, projects I'd never finished. But as I flipped through them, my mind wasn't on furniture anymore. It was on a plan. A quiet, patient plan. Revenge doesn't always come with anger. Sometimes it starts with silence. With observation. With time. I smiled faintly. The kind of smile that comes not from joy, but from understanding. Ethan thought I was a weak old man. Maybe I'd let him think that a little longer. The glass may have missed my face, but it hit something much deeper. Something he'd wish he'd never woken. The next morning, the house smelled like coffee and cold silence. The sunlight pushed through the curtains in thin golden lines, landing across the same dining table that had witnessed last night's humiliation. The glass shards were gone. Claire must have cleaned them up early, probably before Ethan even woke. She always did that, swept up the mess, pretended it never happened, and smiled through it all. I sat alone at the table, my hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. My reflection shimmered on the surface of the liquid, tired eyes, heavy lines, and that look of quiet endurance that comes from years of swallowing pride. My knuckles were still red from picking up the glass last night. I could still hear the sound of it breaking. It had been echoing in my head all night long, a cruel lullaby that wouldn't let me sleep. The kitchen door creaked open. Claire stepped in, her hair tied up, wearing that nervous smile she always put on after Ethan's bad nights. "Morning, Dad," she said softly, avoiding my gaze. "Did you sleep okay?" I looked at her for a moment. My daughter. My only child. The same girl who used to hold my hand walking to school, who used to whisper, "You're my hero, Daddy." "Barely," I said finally. "But I've had worse." She hesitated, fiddling with her wedding ring. "Ethan didn't mean it, you know. He just had too much to drink." I almost laughed. Didn't mean it? He meant every drop of it. Every glare, every word, every broken piece of glass on my floor. But I didn't say that. I just nodded. "Sure, Claire. I know." Her eyes darted to the window. "He's still sleeping. He had a rough week at work. I think he feels bad." "Does he?" I asked, my tone even. Because last I checked, he was laughing. She bit her lip. "Please, Dad. Don't make it harder than it is. You know how he gets." Yes, I knew exactly how he got. That was the problem. He got away with it. Every single time. I didn't want to argue. Not anymore. My heart was too tired for fights that never led anywhere. I just finished my coffee, stood up, and quietly washed the mug in the sink. Claire watched me for a moment, her eyes glassy, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something but didn't. She turned away before a word escaped. Outside, the morning air bit at my skin as I walked to the workshop. Frost sparkled across the grass. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me feel peaceful, but now just reminded me how alone I was. Inside the shed, everything felt as it should. The faint smell of pine, varnish, and time. My tools hung neatly on the wall. I ran my hand over my old workbench, still scarred from decades of carving and sanding. There was something sacred about this space. It was the only part of my life Ethan couldn't ruin. Not yet, anyway. I sat down, pulled out my leather notebook again, and opened it to a blank page. The sound of the pencil scratching against paper was strangely soothing. I began to draw. Not furniture, not toys, not this time. I sketched out something simple but deliberate. A box. A mechanism. Something I could build quietly over a few weeks. Something that looked innocent until it wasn't. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the seed had been planted. And once a seed is planted, it only grows. I worked for hours. It felt good to move my hands again, to shape wood, to measure, to think. With each cut, I imagined the smirk on Ethan's face fading. I didn't want to hurt him, not in the way he hurt me. I wanted him to feel something deeper, realization, regret, the sting of understanding what he had thrown away. Around noon, I heard the back door slam. Heavy footsteps. Ethan's voice. "Hey, old man," he called out. "Claire says you're hiding out here." I didn't answer. I kept sanding the edge of the wooden frame I was working on. He walked in, his usual swagger softened by a hangover, his eyes bloodshot. "Look, about last night." He paused, pretending to search for words. You shouldn't have pissed me off. I turned to him slowly. You threw a glass at my head, Ethan. He shrugged. Yeah, well, you refused to pour me another drink. You know how I get when I'm tired. That was his apology. Not regret, justification. I watched him for a moment and then looked back down at my project. You should probably leave, I said quietly. There are nails and blades everywhere. He smirked. You threatening me, Walter? I smiled faintly. No, I don't threaten people, Ethan. I build. He laughed, but it came out awkward, forced. You're a weird old man. He left, slamming the door behind him. I waited until the echo faded. Then I exhaled deeply. My heart didn't pound anymore. I didn't feel anger or fear, just calm. That steady, focused calm of a man who finally knows what he has to do. When night came, I sat by the window in my room. The snow had started to fall. From here, I could see Claire and Ethan through the crack in the curtain, sitting together on the couch, the TV lighting up their faces. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He looked smug again, the king of a kingdom built on someone else's kindness. And I thought, let him enjoy his crown while it still fits. I opened my notebook one more time and wrote on the top of the page, rebuild, but not for them. That was the moment I made peace with something I'd been afraid to admit. They didn't see me as family anymore. I was their convenience, their safety net, their silence. But I wasn't going to stay silent forever. The next morning, I'd start gathering what I needed. And Ethan would soon learn that even quiet men can roar, just not the way he expects. The following week passed with a strange, heavy calm, the kind that settles in just before a storm. No one mentioned the glass. Not Claire, not Ethan. The silence between us became its own language, sharp and uncomfortable. We ate together, but no one really spoke. Even Noah seemed to understand something had cracked that night, something words couldn't fix. I woke every morning before sunrise, brewed my coffee in the quiet kitchen, and went straight to the shed. It had become my refuge, my world inside a world that didn't want me. I spent hours there, the scent of sawdust clinging to my skin, the rhythmic hum of the saw filling my head with thoughts too dangerous to say out loud. At first, I told myself I was just keeping busy. But deep down, I knew what I was doing. I was building my plan. It started small, sketches, notes, little lists of what I needed. A man like Ethan thrived on control, on being the loudest in the room. My revenge wouldn't take that from him all at once. It would be slow, subtle, the kind of thing that crawls into your head until you can't tell where fear ends and guilt begins. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt that night. Powerless, small, watched. So I began with details. The first thing I built was a small wooden box, harmless at first glance. It looked like something you'd find in a craftsman's shop, smooth edges, polished oak. But inside, I designed a simple mechanism that would make it hum faintly when touched, like a heartbeat trapped inside wood. It was delicate, beautiful, and haunting. I left it on the mantelpiece one evening, without a word. Ethan noticed it the next morning. "What's this?" he asked at breakfast, holding it up. "Just something I made," I said. "A keepsake." He snorted. "You and your useless hobbies." But that night, I heard him in the living room, tapping the lid again and again. He didn't know why it made that soft noise, or why it seemed to pulse when the room got quiet. He didn't know it was powered by a small hidden coil reacting to warmth. All he knew was that it sounded alive. Good. The next few days, I planted more little things. Rearranged tools in the garage. Left an old photograph of my late wife and me on the hallway table, one Ethan had thrown away months ago. Moved a chair in the living room ever so slightly to make him question whether he was remembering things right. Revenge doesn't always need blood. Sometimes it just needs doubt. Claire began noticing changes too. "Dad, you've been in the shed a lot lately," she said one evening, worry softening her voice. "Are you okay?" I smiled faintly. "Better than I've been in a long time." She looked at me carefully, as if trying to read between the lines. "Ethan said you've been doing strange things." I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just getting old." She didn't know what to say to that. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the kind that builds up after years of defending the wrong person. But she wasn't ready to face it yet. Few people are, until it's too late. One afternoon, while Ethan was out, I found Noah in the backyard, sitting in the snow, building something out of sticks. "Grandpa," he said, smiling shyly, "I made a cabin. Like yours." I crouched beside him, the cold biting at my knees. "That's a fine cabin," I said softly. You've got your grandpa's hands. He grinned. Dad says you used to build everything around here. I did, I replied. And maybe one day, I'll build something for you too. Something that lasts. The kid's eyes lit up. For a moment, all the bitterness melted away. I remembered why I stayed, why I endured it all. Because no matter how cruel Ethan was, Noah deserved a better memory of me than the one his father tried to paint. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window in the dim light, looking out over the snowy yard. The hum of the little box echoed faintly through the quiet. I imagined Ethan hearing it again in the dark, unsure if it was real. He'd mocked me for being silent, for being small. But silence can be power when it's used right. I took out my notebook again and flipped to a fresh page. On top, I wrote 2 words. Phase 2. The next part of the plan would require precision. I needed Ethan to feel watched, not just by me, but by the past itself. I'd built something mechanical. Now it was time to build something psychological. I'd start tomorrow. Slowly, quietly. For now, I allowed myself a single, peaceful breath. Because the best revenge isn't about shouting. It's about waiting for the world to go quiet enough that they finally hear what you've been saying all along. Ethan always prided himself on control. He was loud, confident, and certain that every person around him existed to orbit his moods. But control is fragile, and once it cracks, even a whisper can sound like thunder. It began with small things. So small, in fact, that anyone else might have blamed their memory. A misplaced wallet, keys on the wrong counter, a door left ajar when no one had opened it. But for Ethan, control was everything. Losing it, even for a second, made him twitch. On Monday morning, I heard him cursing in the hallway. Claire, did you move my watch? Claire's sleepy voice floated down the stairs. It's probably where you left it. It's not, he snapped. I always put it on the dresser. I sipped my coffee quietly at the table, pretending not to hear. The watch was in the drawer of my workshop, where I'd found it the night before, after Ethan had bragged about his new promotion and thrown his empty glass into the sink like a man marking territory. It wasn't theft. It was balance. That afternoon, I returned it, placed it neatly back on his dresser while he was in the shower. Just a little too obvious, as if it had been there the whole time. When he came downstairs later, he muttered, "Huh, weird." And that word, weird, was the first crack in his certainty. That night, I heard footsteps in the hallway long after everyone had gone to bed. Slow, heavy, uncertain. The kind of walk a man takes when he's not sure if he's awake. I stayed still, eyes open in the dark, listening. The floorboards creaked, the air thick with tension. Then, silence. The next morning, Ethan looked tired. He had shadows under his eyes, and his usual arrogance was muted. "Did you hear anything last night?" he asked. "No," I said, sipping my coffee. "Why?" "I thought I heard someone walking around." I tilted my head. "Maybe the house is settling." He frowned. It sounded like footsteps. I looked up from my mug. "Maybe it's your conscience," I said softly. He blinked. "What?" "Nothing." I smiled faintly. "Coffee's ready." He didn't smile back. Over the next few days, I kept working in the shed, perfecting my little projects. The mechanical hum box had done its job. It unsettled him, made him question what he was hearing. But now I wanted to go further. So I built another one, slightly different this time. Smaller, hidden inside an old picture frame of Claire and Noah. When someone walked by, it emitted a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. Not enough to notice consciously. Just enough to make your nerves twitch, to feel like the air was moving when it wasn't. I placed it on the hallway shelf, right where Ethan passed every morning on his way to work. By the end of the week, he was jumpy, dropped his keys twice, snapped at Claire over nothing. I could see the tension building, knotting around his shoulders like wire. It wasn't guilt yet, but it was close. One evening, I found Claire sitting by the window, staring out at the falling snow. "Dad," she said quietly, "Ethan's been different lately. He barely sleeps. He says he hears things. Feels like the house is," she hesitated, "off." I sat beside her. "Maybe the house is just tired," I said. "It's seen a lot." She gave me a small, sad smile. "You always talk in riddles." "Sometimes riddles are the only way to tell the truth," I replied. She looked down at her hands. "He shouldn't have done what he did that night. I'm sorry, Dad." Her voice cracked on the word sorry. That was the first time she'd said it. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to make something inside me soften, just a little. Later that night, I stood in the hallway, staring at the family photo. The soft hum from the frame pulsed like a heartbeat. The shadows danced across the walls, and for a moment, I imagined my late wife standing beside me, whispering the same thing she used to say when she caught me overthinking. Patience, Walter. Let them come to their own lesson. And I smiled, because the lesson had already begun. The next morning, I found Ethan standing in the hallway, staring at that photo. His jaw was tight, his face pale. What's wrong? I asked gently. He looked at me, eyes wide. I swear that thing moved. Moved? I repeated. He nodded slowly. Last night, I heard it fall, but when I came out, it was still upright. I stepped closer, studying it as if puzzled. You sure you weren't dreaming? He didn't answer. That evening, Claire told me she was taking Noah to visit her friend for the weekend. You'll be okay with Ethan? She asked hesitantly. I smiled. Don't worry about me. Go have fun. After they left, the house grew quiet. Ethan poured himself a drink. Of course he did. He muttered to himself as he walked from room to room, double-checking locks, glancing over his shoulder. At midnight, I watched from the top of the stairs as he froze in the hallway, staring at the picture frame again. The faint hum filled the silence. He reached out, touched it, and jumped. I turned away before he saw me. My heart was steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I was patient. Let the house whisper. Let it breathe. Ethan had taken my peace, my respect, my home. But now, the house itself was giving something back, its own quiet form of justice. And the best part? He'd never be able to tell if it was real or if it was me. By the following week, Ethan was unraveling. It started with small things, a dropped plate, a muttered curse, a twitch in his jaw that hadn't been there before. He moved through the house like a man being followed by something only he could feel. I'd see him pause in doorways, look behind himself, rub the back of his neck as if expecting a hand there. And then came the lights. The first time it happened, I was in the living room, reading. A faint buzz hummed through the ceiling, and the chandelier flickered. Ethan looked up sharply from the couch. What the hell was that? Old wiring, I said without glancing up. But it wasn't. I'd spent that afternoon in the basement adjusting the dimmer connection to flicker at random intervals, subtle enough to seem natural, yet rhythmic enough to feel alive. It wasn't malice. It was art. Ethan frowned and took a long sip from his glass. You should fix that, Walter. I will, I said. Eventually. Claire came home that night tired and quiet. She kissed Ethan on the cheek, and he flinched slightly. What's wrong with you? She asked, half laughing. Nothing, he muttered. This house is weird lately. She glanced around. Weird how? He hesitated, his eyes darting toward me. I keep hearing things. Seeing things. I think your dad's. He stopped himself. My dad's what? Ethan forced a chuckle. Never mind. I'm just tired. She shook her head and went upstairs. I met his eyes across the room, and for the first time, I saw it, fear. Small, fragile, but real. It was working. That night, I went down to the basement again. The smell of dust and metal hung heavy in the air. I worked by the dim light of an old lamp, tightening screws, connecting fine copper wires, adjusting timers. The steady sound of my tools was almost meditative. My plan wasn't about chaos. It was about erosion. I wanted to take Ethan apart piece by piece, until he didn't know what was real anymore. When I finished, I went upstairs, washed my hands, and sat in the kitchen. From there, I could hear him pacing above me. His footsteps crossed the hall, paused, crossed again. Then a door slammed. I smiled. The lights flickered once more. The next morning, Claire pulled me aside. Dad, have you noticed anything strange lately? I played innocent. Strange? Like what? She hesitated. Ethan's not sleeping. He says he hears whispers at night. Voices. He even said he saw something moving in the hallway. I took a long breath, keeping my voice calm. Grief does strange things to people. Grief? She asked, frowning. For the life he's losing, I said quietly. Even if he doesn't know it yet. She didn't understand, but part of her didn't want to. She just nodded, sighing. I wish he'd stopped drinking. He's been worse lately. Then maybe, I said, it's time he learned what being sober really feels like. That night, when they went to bed, I slipped into the kitchen and poured out every bottle of whiskey he had left. I refilled them with weak tea and food coloring. It looked perfect, the same amber tone, the same illusion of warmth. When Ethan poured himself a glass later, I watched from the shadows as he frowned after the first sip. He stared at the drink, then at the bottle, then poured another. Same taste, same confusion. He threw the glass against the sink, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't flinch. Everything okay? I called out gently. He turned, his face pale and tight. Did you do something to my drink? I raised an eyebrow. Why would I? He stepped closer, veins bulging at his temples. Don't play games with me, old man. Ethan, I said softly, you're tired. You've been seeing things, hearing things, maybe tasting things too. He froze, staring at me, and for a long second, neither of us spoke. There it was, the shift. The moment when the hunter realizes he's being hunted. Stay out of my way, he hissed finally. I smiled faintly. Of course. The next day, the snowstorm came. Heavy, thick, endless. The wind howled through the chimney, rattling the windows like an angry hand. The lights flickered again, not by my doing this time, but the storms. Nature itself seemed to join my quiet war. Ethan grew more paranoid. Every sound made him jump. He accused Claire of moving his things, of spying on him. They fought in whispers at first, then in shouts. From my room, I listened to every word. You're losing it, Ethan. Claire yelled. You need help. He slammed his fist on the table. It's your father. He's doing something. He's trying to drive me crazy. She cried out. You're doing that to yourself. I smiled in the dark. Maybe I was cruel. Maybe I was tired. Maybe both. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had power again. Quiet, deliberate, patient power. When the shouting stopped, I looked out the window. The snow had buried the world outside, soft and silent. The flickering light reflected in the glass like a heartbeat, faint and steady. Patience, I whispered to myself. He's almost there. Ethan thought he was watching me. He didn't realize the house was watching him. And soon enough, he'd break, just like that glass had. The storm outside howled for 3 straight days. Snow blanketed everything. The porch, the driveway, even the old mailbox that still bore my late wife's handwriting, the Graysons. The power flickered on and off, wind moaning through the eaves like an old soul mourning its home. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the kind of tension that sits on your chest and makes every breath feel borrowed. Ethan hadn't gone to work since the storm began. He prowled through the house like a caged animal, checking doors, muttering under his breath, jumping at every sound. His eyes were bloodshot, his beard unshaven, and the smell of stale whiskey clung to his clothes like guilt. I kept to myself, silent, patient, deliberate. I stayed mostly in the kitchen, carving small wooden figurines for Noah. Little foxes, birds, a cabin, anything that reminded me of gentler times. I wanted my hands busy. Idle hands remember too much. Claire tried to keep peace between us, but even she was fraying. The shouting between them had turned from sharp words into deep, exhausted silence. The kind that comes when two people stop fighting because they've already lost something they can't name. On the second night of the storm, the power went out completely. We lit candles around the living room. The shadows swayed on the walls, dancing to the rhythm of the wind outside. The storm muffled the world beyond these walls. There was no past, no future, just the raw pulse of now. Noah was upstairs, asleep. Claire sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Ethan sat across from her, a drink in hand, glaring into the flame like it had insulted him. I sat at the far end of the table, sharpening a small knife for my carving. You like this, don't you? Ethan said suddenly, his voice low. I didn't look up. Like what? This, he gestured around. All of it. Sitting there in the dark, watching us like some ghost. Ethan, Claire warned softly, not tonight. He ignored her. You've been messing with me. I know it. The lights, the noises, the pictures, the damn whiskey. I finally looked at him, calm as winter itself. You should get some rest. You're not thinking clearly. He slammed his glass down. Don't talk to me like I'm crazy. I set down my knife and folded my hands on the table. Then stop acting like it. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Too clean, too sharp. They hit him harder than I expected. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You think you can talk to me like that in my house? I smiled faintly. Your house? I let the words roll off my tongue like a memory. Funny, I still have the deed in my name. Claire gasped. Dad, but it was too late. Ethan's face twisted with fury. You're lying. Am I? I asked quietly. Do you even know what your wife signed when I moved in? You think you own these walls, but you only live inside them because I allowed it." The room went deathly still. The storm outside pounded against the windows like fists. Claire's lips parted, her eyes flicking between us. "Ethan," she whispered, "sit down." But he didn't. He lunged forward, grabbed the edge of the table, and hissed through clenched teeth, "You're done humiliating me." His hand trembled, the same way it had that night with the glass. The candlelight made his shadow stretch across the wall, monstrous and warped. For a moment, I saw myself reflected in him. The anger, the loss, the desperate need to be seen. And then, I saw something else, fear. He wasn't just angry. He was scared of me now. Good. He stormed out of the room, muttering under his breath. The door to the basement creaked open, then slammed. Claire sat frozen on the couch. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Fixing what I should have fixed years ago," I said softly. "You married a man who builds nothing and breaks everything." I just wanted to remind him that nothing in this house is his. Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, stop. I can't lose both of you." I touched her shoulder gently. "You won't lose me." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. Because something inside me had shifted, the calm patience that guided me was turning into something else. Something sharper. Hours passed. The storm raged on. I could hear Ethan moving around downstairs, the clang of metal, the creak of pipes. Maybe he thought he could fix the wiring himself, reclaim some sense of control. Maybe he just needed to break something. Then, a sudden crash. "Ethan!" Claire screamed. I was already on my feet, the knife still in my hand. I rushed toward the basement door. Claire was right behind me. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. The darkness swallowed everything. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the flashlight beam cut through the gloom. And there he was, kneeling near the breaker box, sweat glistening on his face, his hands trembling. He looked up, wild-eyed. "Stay away from me," he shouted. "Ethan, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice low. He pointed at me with shaking hands. "You did this. You've been playing with me, trying to make me lose it." I took one slow step closer. "You've been losing it all on your own." He stepped back, tripping over a loose board. His elbow hit the workbench, knocking a box of screws to the floor. The sound scattered through the silence like falling rain. "Please," Claire said, her voice trembling. "Both of you stop." But neither of us moved. The air crackled with something primal. And then, from somewhere deep inside me, maybe from years of humiliation, from every quiet moment I'd been ignored, the words came out in a whisper that didn't sound like my own. "You threw a glass at me, Ethan. You remember that?" He blinked, sweat running down his face. "So what?" I stepped closer. "That was the moment you lost everything. You just didn't know it yet." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as the old man in the corner, but as the thing standing behind the storm. Then the lights flickered back on. For a heartbeat, everything was still. And in that brief, electric silence, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't sure who I was punishing anymore, Ethan or myself. The storm didn't ease that night. It screamed against the walls like an angry spirit, shaking the shutters and rattling the chimney. Inside, the air felt heavier than ever, charged, dangerous, alive. Every breath seemed to echo. Every creak of the house sounded like a warning. After the confrontation in the basement, Ethan hadn't said another word. He'd locked himself in the guest room, pacing for hours, the floorboards groaning under his weight. Claire sat in her room, crying quietly, the sound muffled through the wall. Noah slept through it all upstairs, blissfully unaware that his family was falling apart, one whisper at a time. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the single candle flickering on the table. The flame trembled, fighting the cold drafts sneaking through the cracks of the old house. Its reflection danced in my coffee cup like a heartbeat, unsteady, fading, stubborn. For years, I had been that flame, barely alive, pushed by every wind that came my way. But now the wind was mine. Still, a thought wouldn't leave me. How far was I willing to go? Sometime around midnight, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, uneven. Ethan again. The kitchen door creaked open. He stepped inside, his eyes hollow, his shoulders sagging. He looked less like a man and more like a ghost wearing human skin. His hand clutched something, a bottle of whiskey, the one he'd found hidden behind the old pantry. I hadn't replaced the tea in that one. He'd found the real thing. He poured himself a glass, then another, spilling some on the counter. You think I don't see it, Walter? His voice was low, cracked. You've been trying to make me look crazy. You want Claire to leave me. You want this house back. You want everything. He took another gulp. Well, you can have it. All of it. I stayed quiet. The silence between us was louder than any argument could have been. He slammed his glass on the table. Say something. I looked up at him, calm as ever. I already did. You just never listened. Ethan laughed, an awful, broken sound. You think you're clever. Some wise old man teaching lessons. You're nothing but a bitter ghost who can't let go of control. His words didn't sting. They rolled off me like rain on glass. I gave you everything, I said softly. My home, my trust, my daughter, and you spat on all of it. You mistook kindness for weakness. He sneered. Because it was weakness. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor. No, Ethan. Weakness is what you're feeling right now. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. His hand twitched, like he was trying to decide between hitting me or breaking something. His voice trembled with rage. You think you've won, old man? I shook my head. No, I think you've already lost. Suddenly, he grabbed me by the collar, shoving me against the wall. The candle wobbled, nearly toppling. His eyes burned with something raw. Anger, shame, fear. The storm outside roared louder, as if answering his fury. Ethan, stop. Claire's voice broke through from the hallway. She ran toward us, barefoot, her hair loose, eyes wide. Please, stop this. He turned toward her, his grip loosening slightly. He's been playing with me, Claire. The lights, the sounds. He's trying to make me insane. Dad? She whispered, tears spilling down her face. Is it true? I looked at her. My daughter. My little girl. The one I used to carry on my shoulders, who once painted my hands with red clay and called me her hero. And in that instant, something inside me cracked. The truth, the quiet, cruel truth, hung in the air, heavy as the storm. I just wanted peace, I said quietly. He took that from me. From you. Claire covered her mouth. Oh God, what did you do? I made him feel what he made me feel, I said. Small. Helpless. Watched. She stepped back, shaking her head. You both need help. Ethan pointed at me, his voice rising. You hear that? Even your daughter knows you're sick. Before I could answer, he pushed me again, harder this time. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the table. The candle fell, the flame licking across the tablecloth before I smothered it with my sleeve. Claire screamed. Enough! The house fell into silence again. Only the storm filled the void. Ethan's chest heaved. My heart pounded against my ribs, not from fear, but from something darker, realization. I had gone too far. The quiet revenge that once felt righteous now felt poisoned. Claire turned to Ethan. Get out. He blinked. What? I said get out, she shouted, her voice trembling with something fierce and final. You can't stay here. Not after this. Ethan stared at her, shocked. His lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time, he looked small, powerless. He glanced at me, his eyes full of hate, then back at Claire. You'll regret this. Maybe, she said, but I won't regret protecting my father. He hesitated for a moment, then grabbed his coat and stormed out into the snow, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Silence. Just the storm and the sound of my daughter's quiet sobs. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Dad, what happened to you? I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell her that I'd done it for her, for our family, for everything Ethan had stolen from us. But as I opened my mouth, I realized I no longer knew if that was true. I reached out, placing my hand on hers. I just wanted to be respected again, I whispered. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. The candle's last ember flickered on the table between us, smoke curling toward the ceiling like a final prayer. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing every footprint that led away from the house, as if trying to bury everything that had happened that night. And yet, as I stared into that cold white silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. Because men like Ethan don't disappear quietly. They come back. 3 days passed after Ethan left, and for the first time in years, the house breathed again. The walls stopped trembling with tension, the air felt lighter, and even the floorboards seemed to creak with relief instead of anger. Claire tried to act like everything was fine. She cooked breakfast, tidied the rooms, played music while she worked. but her smile never reached her eyes. It was the kind of calm that comes after a hurricane, quiet, but not peaceful. Noah asked once, "When's Dad coming back?" Claire froze, her hand trembling over the sink. "He just needs some time away, honey." I said nothing, because in my heart, I knew time wouldn't fix what had already been broken. Still, I wished, foolishly, that I could believe he was gone for good. But men like Ethan never leave quietly. They leave to regroup, to return. It was the fourth night when I heard it, the crunch of boots on snow outside. The storm had passed days ago, but the cold still bit through the night like a living thing. I stood by the window, pulling the curtain just enough to see the outline of a car parked halfway down the road. The engine was off, but smoke rose from the exhaust, faint in the moonlight. I didn't wake Claire. I didn't need to. Something deep inside me already knew. I waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, a shadow moved near the porch. Slow, deliberate. The boards creaked under the weight of a man who'd walked that path 100 times, but never like this. A soft knock followed. 3 dull thuds. Not impatient, almost ceremonial. I opened the door. Ethan stood there, covered in snow, his eyes bloodshot, his beard thicker, his face pale and hollow. He looked like a man who'd spent 3 nights wrestling with something inhuman. Maybe himself. "Claire here?" he asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. I didn't move. "What do you want?" He smiled, a tired, bitter smile. Closure. For a moment, we just stood there, 2 men who'd destroyed each other in silence. The cold air moved between us like a ghost. Claire's voice came from behind me. "Ethan." He looked over my shoulder, eyes softening when he saw her. "I just came to talk. Please." She hesitated, then nodded. "Come in." I wanted to stop her, to tell her no, to keep him out. But this was her house too now, and I'd already done enough damage. So I stepped aside. Inside, the air filled with a strange tension, half sorrow, half danger. Ethan removed his gloves, brushed off the snow, and sat down at the table like a man returning to the scene of a crime. Claire poured him coffee. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the cup. "Thanks." No one spoke for a long time. The clock ticked on the wall. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees. Finally, he said, "I'm not proud of what I did. I lost control." I stayed silent, watching him. "I shouldn't have thrown that glass. Or touched you that night." He glanced at me. "You're right. I took too much from you." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan." He raised a hand. "Let me finish." His gaze locked on mine. "But what you did to me, Walter, the tricks, the noises, the lights, you made me doubt my own mind." I didn't flinch. "You deserved worse." He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I need you to know something." He reached into his jacket. For a heartbeat, I tensed, thinking he had a weapon. But when his hand came out, he was holding an envelope. Old, crumpled, stained by melted snow. He slid it across the table. "Read it." I looked down. My name was written in shaky handwriting, Claire's. I frowned, opened it carefully. Inside was a folded document. The property transfer papers I'd signed years ago, giving part of the house to my daughter. But at the bottom, there was a second signature, Ethan's, and a handwritten note. "This home is yours again. I'll find my own." I stared at it, stunned. Claire looked at him, confused. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "I'm not the man I thought I was. But maybe, I can still stop being the one you both hate." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting we'd ever done. I didn't know if I believed him, or if this was just another trick. But there was something in his eyes, something broken enough to almost look human again. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned to me. "I used to think you were weak, Walter. But weakness doesn't scare me anymore. Regret does." Then he was gone. The door closed softly behind him. The sound lingered in the air like a sigh. Claire sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "Dad, what just happened?" I didn't answer. My hands shook as I held the paper. I should have felt victory, peace, maybe. But instead, I felt hollow. Revenge, I realized, was a strange kind of hunger. It fills you up until there's nothing left to feel. And when it's done, you're still empty. That night, as I sat alone in the workshop, I stared at my tools. The same ones I'd used to build the hum boxes, the same ones I'd used to craft every part of my plan. I thought of Ethan's eyes before he left, the flicker of remorse, the faint echo of the man he might have been before the poison of pride set in. And for the first time since this all began, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. Forgive me. The words felt foreign on my tongue. But somehow right. Outside, the snow began to fall again, quiet, endless, forgiving. And in that silence, for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel watched. I just felt human. The days that followed felt like walking through the remains of a storm. The kind where the world looks calm, but the ground underneath is still soft, dangerous, unsettled. Ethan was gone. Just like that. No calls. No word. No trace. His car disappeared from the road. His name vanished from the mailbox. Claire told people he'd gone to stay with family out of state, and everyone seemed content to believe it. Small towns don't ask many questions when the answers might get ugly. For a while, life tried to return to normal. Claire started working again at the local library. Noah went back to school, always asking when his dad would come home. I told him soon, even though I didn't believe it. The house itself seemed calmer. The flickering lights stopped, the shadows stayed where they belonged, and the silence was finally peaceful. But peace, I was learning, has a way of hiding things. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The snow had stopped falling, and the air was sharp, clean, almost kind. I was walking up the drive to get the newspaper when I saw it, a small envelope half buried in the snow near the porch. At first, I thought it was trash blown by the wind. But when I picked it up, I saw my name written on the front. Walter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Strong, angled, impatient. Ethan's. My heart stumbled. I looked around, half expecting to see him watching from somewhere nearby. Nothing. Just the cold. Just the quiet. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it. Inside was a short letter, written in ink that had bled slightly from the damp. Walter, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I'd take it even if you offered. But you were right about me. About everything. I took and took until there was nothing left for anyone. I made your daughter cry. I made your home a prison. And when you finally made me see what I'd become, I didn't know how to live with it. I'm leaving for good this time. There's a cabin up north where no one knows my name. Maybe I can learn what it means to be quiet, the way you always were. You think you won, but you didn't. You just reminded me of who I used to be before life turned me bitter, and that's something I'll never forget. Take care of Claire and Noah. They need the man I never managed to be. Ethan. I read it twice. 3 times. Each word felt heavier than the last. There was no apology, not really. But there was something better, recognition. For men like Ethan, that was the closest thing to redemption they ever got. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. For a long time, I just sat there, staring out the window at the snow-covered yard. The same path where he'd once stood, shouting, red-faced, alive with pride. Now there was nothing, just footprints fading into the white. When Claire came home that evening, I handed her the letter. She read it in silence. When she finished, her hands trembled slightly. Do you think he means it? She asked. I think, I said slowly, he finally understands what silence can teach a man. She nodded, eyes wet. I don't hate him anymore. I just wish things had been different. So do I admitted. But maybe this is how it had to end. She placed the letter back on the table, smoothing the edges gently with her palm, as if trying to erase the pain written into every word. Maybe this is a beginning, she whispered. And in that moment, I realized something I'd missed for years. Revenge doesn't end when your enemy falls. It ends when you stop carrying the weight of what they did. That night, I went out to the shed one last time. The tools were still there, coated in dust, quiet and still. I opened the drawer where I kept my old projects, the hum boxes, the notes, the plans. One by one, I threw them into the furnace. The fire hissed, the smoke curled upward like a sigh, and I watched it all burn. The light flickered across the walls, dancing like ghosts finally set free. When it was over, I closed the shed door and stood in the cold, breathing in the clean air. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired. But the kind of tired that comes after finishing something that took too long to end. Inside the house, I could hear Claire laughing softly with Noah, a sound I hadn't heard in months. That was enough. Before going to bed, I placed Ethan's letter in a small wooden box, the same one that once hummed in the dark. I locked it, placed it on the mantel, and whispered, "Let it stay quiet now." And as I turned out the lights, the house, my house, finally rested. For the first time since that night with the glass, peace didn't feel like an illusion. It felt earned. The first snow of February came soft and slow, blanketing the town in silence. I stood by the window, watching it fall over the yard. The same yard where laughter used to live, where Ethan once shouted, where Noah used to chase snowflakes until his cheeks turned red. Now the world outside was white, still, untouched. For the first time, the house didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel haunted. It simply was. Claire and Noah were out visiting friends that weekend, leaving me alone with the kind of quiet that used to hurt. But tonight, it didn't hurt. Tonight, it felt like forgiveness. I sat in my favorite chair, a blanket over my knees, the fire crackling gently beside me. The hum box still rested on the mantel, silent now, its purpose long gone. Above it, Ethan's letter sat in its little wooden case, locked and sealed. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it, wondering where he'd gone. Was he alive? Did he keep his promise to disappear? I didn't know, and maybe I didn't need to. Some questions only have peace as their answer. I reached for my notebook, the same one where I'd drawn my plans months ago, the same one where revenge was born. Now, its pages were filled with sketches of simpler things. Toys for Noah, shelves for Claire's books, notes for a project I'd never finish. But on the first blank page, I began to write. Not a confession, not a plan, a story. For Noah. When you're old enough to read this, you'll know that people aren't made of good or bad, just choices. Some choices grow roots, others leave scars. I made both. I wanted to protect your mother, but I forgot that protection and vengeance aren't the same thing. I built a house out of silence, and in that silence, I became something I swore I'd never be, the very man I despised. If you ever face someone who wrongs you, remember this. Revenge might give you back your voice, but forgiveness gives you back your soul. Love, Grandpa Walter. The words came slowly, each one heavier than the last, but when I finished, my hands stopped trembling. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty, but it was true. Later that night, I went outside. The snow had stopped, and the moon hung low and silver above the trees. The cold bit through my coat, but I didn't mind. I walked to the edge of the yard, to the old oak tree that had stood longer than any of us. Beneath it, the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when everything unnecessary has finally fallen away. I closed my eyes and listened. To the wind, to the house behind me, to my own heartbeat, slow, steady, forgiving. When I opened them again, I saw footprints in the snow, mine leading away from the house, then turning back, crossing over themselves. It made me think of my life. All the paths I'd taken, all the ones I'd ruined, all the ones I could still fix. In the morning, Claire and Noah returned. I was already in the workshop, carving something small. When Noah peeked in, his eyes lit up. "What are you making, Grandpa?" I smiled. "A birdhouse." He grinned. "For the garden?" "For the garden," I said. "For the things that deserve a home." Claire stood in the doorway, watching us. Her smile was soft, the first real one I'd seen from her in years. "He missed you," she said quietly. I looked at my grandson, his hands covered in sawdust, his laughter bright as sunlight. I missed him too. That evening, when the day ended and the fire dimmed, I sat in my chair once more. The house was warm. The world outside was white. And for the first time in a long time, my heart didn't carry weight, only memory. I thought of Ethan, not with anger, not with pity, but with understanding. He had been my lesson, and I had been his. The past no longer called to me. It whispered, yes, but softly now, like an old song fading with distance. Before going to bed, I placed the notebook beside the hum box on the mantel. 2 stories side by side, one of revenge, one of redemption. As I turned off the light, the last flicker of the fire cast a faint glow across the room, and I could almost swear I heard my wife's voice in the hush. "You finally built something that lasts, Walter." And for the first time, I believed her. Epilogue, optional narration for ending scene. Years later, Noah found that notebook. He read it sitting under the same oak tree his grandfather once stood beside, snow falling around him. He didn't cry. He smiled. Because he understood, the greatest revenge Walter ever took wasn't against Ethan. It was against the bitterness that once ruled him. He'd beaten it. Quietly. Completely.